Okay. All right, guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a few different ways that you can uh, create charts and graphs to represent your data. So I made up fake data here. This isn't from anyone's experiment. This is just different ways that you can do things. So one of our groups was doing an experiment where they would have people watch a video while listening to music, and they have another group of people watch a video while not listening to music, and they ask them the same series of questions. The idea being that if you're listening to music, will you be more distracted and will you perform worse as an observer than someone who wasn't listening to music? So, like I said, I made up fake data for the purpose of a good visualization. So I made this up so clearly people who listened with music did not get as many questions correct as the people who listened without music. So we can input charts to visualize this data. The easiest way to do it is to highlight the data that you want to graph and then go to Insert and Chart. And boom, it will automatically produce a chart. And we can see it generated an axis with titles. It generated the title for the whole graph. This is not a very good title. It's just what was at the top of the area that I highlighted. So that's what it generated. It generated a legend, so you know which line is which piece of data. And we can very clearly see here that our people who listened without music performed better on every single question than the people with music. There's also some room here to make assumptions about, even though people who listened without music performed better than people who listened with music on question 5, that's clearly the lowest performing question. Perhaps that question was very difficult or maybe worded in a way that encouraged incorrect answers. But these are things that we can think about when we do our reflections and we write our reports. So other things you can do with this chart. This is a line chart, but it doesn't have to be a line chart. Where it says chart style, you can edit our colors, themes, things like that. If we go to setup, this is where we can change the actual chart type. So this is a line chart, but what if I wanted a column chart? There we go. So now we have it represented by column. Each individual question, red is with music, blue is without music. And in the customize, you can change the legend, you can change the axis titles. Let's say I want to change the title because I don't like the title. So chart title with and without music. Title, effect of music on observation. That's a better chart title that is a little more descriptive of what this is describing. Also, I'm not a huge fan of having my legend at the top of my graph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this down to the bottom corner. I just prefer it over there. And I can resize this. I can scooch this up a little bit. I can, and yep, there we go. I can move this to a place where I kind of prefer it over there. I don't like my legend at the top of the graph. Just an example of what we can do. We don't have an axis on the y-axis, so shut this down. We don't have the vertical axis, so there's vertical axis. Number of correct responses. There. So now I know what this y-axis is. Cool, right? There's one graph. This is good for comparing data because in these trials, we had an equal number of people listening with and without music. But in some of our trials, that's not going to be the case. So here's an example where we only had 7 people listening with music, and we had 10 people listening without music. So the only way we can compare these is if we compare them as proportions, numbers of right answers per response. So that is a percentage. But the way that we create the graph is the same. I had to do a little bit of math here. You see, I wrote in an equation, 4 divided by the total number of responses times 100 equals 57%. And then I clicked and dragged this equation around. Do you guys want to see me do that? Do you know how to do that? You don't. Okay, so I'm just going to delete this. All right, so I want to turn my responses into percents. So I can click equals, and a percent is part out of the whole. So 4 divided by 7 times 100, 57%. Cool beans. So I could type that in for every single box, but that would take a while. So there's this shortcut. So E3, E13, these refer to the coordinates of the cell in the chart. So for every single one of these, the number of correct responses is all out of 7. So what I can do is I can go over here and I can put in a money sign. Oop, that's not a money sign. I can put in a little money symbol before the letter, which is the column, and the number, which is the row.
Can you zoom in, please, a little bit? I can't see.
Can I what? Zoom in?
Yes, please.
Okay. So we look at our equation here. It's E3 divided by E13. So this divided by this, and these money symbols mean that this equation is always going to reference E13. So if I click the corner of it and I drag it down, it calculates a percent for the whole column. And if we look at each individual equation, this changes. So now this is referencing this cell, but it's still referencing E13. So I go to the next one. Now we're referencing E5, but this is still E13. E6, still E13. So I can write the same equation here. This equals with music divided by this number. And here's another trick. If you don't want to type in the money signs, how many trials were there? 10. We can just write in the number 10 times 100, and that'll give us our percentage. And then the same thing, we click the corner, click and drag, there's our percentages. So really quickly, we can do a whole bunch of math and turn these numbers into percentages. So I'm going to zoom back out now, because now I'm going to make another graph. In the same way I did before, I'm going to highlight the data that I want to graph, and then I'm going to insert a chart. The only thing that's missing here is that over here, I highlighted the questions too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a row here. And then I'm going to copy and paste this over so we're consistent with the charts. Okay. So now I do the same thing. Highlight the data, insert, chart. And because the last chart that I made was a bar chart, it automatically creates a bar chart. So this data looks a little bit different than this data because we only had 7 trials. So these numbers, when we're looking at total responses, like total correct answers, they look a lot closer over here, or they look much different than they are, because when we convert them to percentages, we look at the proportion rather than the total number. If you have 15 people do one thing and only 5 people do another thing, you're going to have a lot more responses from the people who, from the group of 15, just because there's more of them. So you have to take that into account when you represent your data. Let's look at other ways that we can represent this. Actually, that's pretty good. We've done column, we've done graph. There are other types of charts that you can make, but really column and bar are what lend themselves to this information. So now I have another tab here, because not everybody did an experiment where there was clearly two groups, with music, without music. For instance, Miriam made an experiment where everyone watched the same video, but the questions, some of the questions were focused on people who were wearing very bright colors. Some of the questions were focused on people who were wearing dark colors. So we have to know which questions are focused on which, so we can compare, are people observing brighter colors more readily and they kind of forgetting about the dark colors, or vice versa. So again, I made up data to make this very, very clean and obvious. So we had 10 questions. And let's say that questions 1 and 2 were about someone wearing bright colors. Questions 3 through 5 were about someone wearing dark colors. Bright, dark, bright, bright, dark. All right. This data isn't very easy to look at. If it's all mixed up, you can't really do much with that. So if we graphed this, is this telling you any information? I guess we can look at it and go bright, bright. And we can look at the bottom and say, okay, yeah, generally the questions about people wearing bright colors are getting answered higher, but it's still kind of a mess of a graph. I don't really love this. So I can come back to this data and I want to sort this data because I want to get it all. I want to get all the questions about people wearing bright colors clumped together, and I want to get all the questions about people wearing dark colors clumped together. So I highlight the information I'm concerned with. I click data and I go down to sort range. So does this data have a header row? No, I've just highlighted just the boxes that I want sorted. I want to sort by column A. You see column A is over here. And I want to sort alphabetically from A to Z. So I click sort. Here we go. Now I got all my brights at the top. I got all my darks at the bottom. I got my number of correct responses. And my chart reorganized itself as well. So I hope that you guys are going to go back and rewatch this video because I see y'all on your phones over there, which is, you know, the beauty of technology. We get to not pay attention and then we can go back and watch the video later. Another way that I did this is that we can sort the data by question like this. We can also break it apart like this. So I just broke it into 2 columns and you can have 2 separate graphs. This is also a pretty good data table. If you want to look at the information in a table rather than a graph, we can do that too. We can also turn these things into percentages. We have our number of correct responses and we have our total number of responses. So we can do the same thing we did before and write an equation. Oops. To turn this into a percent. So percent responses correct. And I'm going to hit my wrap tool just to make it a little more readily readable. I just like to get my tables clean, you know, I like them the way I like them. Let's get a little space here. So I have my equation written, I can click, I can drag, boom. Now I have everything graphed as a percentage. Just another way to do things. And then you can include this graph if you'd like. You can graph percentages or you can graph the number of correct responses. Either way works. But these are just some of the ways that you can present your data, because in your report, you're going to have to present the data both visually and in written form. So you're going to have to present a table, a chart that talks about the data and also explain what it means. So here are my results. Here's the hard data, the cold hard facts. Here's what I think it means. Here's my conclusions. So the better that the data is represented and more easily readable, the easier it is for you to argue your case and make your point. So these are just a couple ways that you can make charts. I hope this is helpful, sorting data, organizing ideas. But before we even do that, you are going to have to collect data from your experiment. So let's table this for now. We'll come back to this when we need it. And until then, let's gather some data that we can crunch.